Welcome to another edition of Take a Stand TV with your host, Christian apologist, author, and speaker, Eric Barger. You can subscribe to our updates and find Eric online at ericbarger.com. Now, here's Eric Barger.
Well, greetings and thanks for joining me. I'm Eric Barger, and this is Globalism in the Midst of Pandemic, Part 2 of our series. Sure appreciate your prayers and support during this time. You know, whenever I get into these heavier topics, there's always an extra amount of spiritual warfare going on, and, you know, it usually tells me that we're on the right track, but do appreciate your prayers and support a lot. Here I am, a traveling ministry, usually travel 200 days a year or so, and here I am, a traveling ministry off the road. So makes it a time when we need your prayers, and we definitely need your support and appreciate that very much. Before I get started, please go over to our YouTube channel. That's Eric Barger, Take a Stand. Just go over to our YouTube channel and subscribe to the channel. And also then go over to ericbarger.com. And don't go yet, but go over to ericbarger.com and subscribe to our email update newsletter. If you don't currently get our email updates, that's where we alert you to things that we believe the Christian community needs to understand and know about. So anytime there's a new video, a new article, a new book, anything like that, we'll announce it at ericbarger.com and through the email list. Now, if you viewed part 1 of this series, then you heard me express the long-held belief that globalists watch for any crisis to exploit so they can gain advantage and, of course, so they can advance their cause. Another important aspect of how globalists operate is through the sometimes overt but usually covert deception. And I'll explain more of that, especially in parts 3 and 4. In the case of Bill Gates, he captures the attention of the media every time he speaks. There's no doubt that Bill Gates garners favor equal to that of a head of state, and few media members dare challenge him. After interjecting himself and his money into so many discussions concerning health issues in particular, and especially vaccinations worldwide, many in the media simply consider him an expert, whether he is or not, whenever he inserts his ideas. After all, he's Bill Gates, multi-billionaire, richest man in the world for many years, still the second richest man in the world right now, second only to Jeff Bezos. He's a philanthropist. He's the king of vaccines. Of course he's an expert. Well, I'm not so sure about all of that necessarily. Though he comes off generous and congenial and unassuming, Bill Gates is usually a case study in how to lavishly spread an enormous amount of wealth around, though apparently very philanthropic in his endeavors, but that gets him a lot of play. It buys him a seat on the world stage, but it also positions him to be able to promote his globalist worldview whenever possible. You know, we're watching this very thing take place, and with the help of those who are in the left-leaning globalist media and with the ideas that they want forwarded, Bill Gates is speaking as if he possesses unquestioned authority. But everything is not as it seems. And not only does Gates stand to make a fortune from his quest to distribute the coronavirus vaccines, but a key globalist dream could be fulfilled in the process. As I close part 1 of the series, I mentioned that we would examine what Bill Gates was referring to when he spoke of digital immunity proof and digital certificates in his recent TED Talk and Reddit Ask Me Anything sessions. Here's an example from part 1 of the series, Globalism in the Midst of Pandemic. Let's watch. On March 24, 2020, Bill Gates began to speak to an opportunity that had been provided by the coronavirus crisis. During an online TED Talk, and most of you know what that is, he addressed his vision for how the world can move ahead in light of a pandemic. He said, eventually what we'll have to have is certificates of who's a recovered person, who's a vaccinated person. Because you don't want people moving around the world where you'll have some countries that won't have it under control, sadly. You don't want to completely block off the ability for people to go there and come back and move around. So eventually there will be this digital immunity proof that will help facilitate the global reopening up. 6 days earlier, on March 18th, during an Ask Me Anything session on Reddit, and most of you know what that is too, Gates spoke of the same issue as he responded to a question concerning the future of commerce and maintaining social distancing. Gates stated during that Reddit Ask Me Anything session, "Eventually we will have some digital certificates to show who has recovered and who's been tested recently, or when we have a vaccine, who has received it." I want you to ponder the idea of digital certificates. We'll talk a little more about it today, but in my next update, we'll detail exactly what he is speaking about. Both of these events were reported on widely. You probably heard about it in the news. You can find both the TED Talk and the Reddit Ask Me Anything session with Gates across the internet. And by the way, at some point on March 31st, that last sentence of the quote that I put on the screen a minute ago that caused such red flags to fly was edited out of the TED Talk online. You won't see it, you won't hear it online, but thankfully there are recordings of it. And here it is again, that last sentence. "So eventually there will be a digital immunity proof that will help facilitate the global reopening up." Tell you what, that gives me chills, and it should give them to you too. If Bill Gates didn't have the clout and hadn't spread his money around so much to gain so much favor, it would be different. But he does have the clout. That's the point. So there's the clip from part 1, so everybody can kind of be up to speed who is watching today. Bill Gates' statements about digital immunity proof and digital certificates in his Reddit talk and recent TED Talk speak to his underlying philosophy, and still leaves us with many unanswered questions. And because of this, and because of many previous statements and actions, Gates has attracted much opposition, some of which is solid and factual, and some that's purely conspiratorial. This, in part, has facilitated many Gates defenders who just believe that any opposition, any opposing opinions should be silenced. Here's a portion of a video produced on April 27th, 2020 by TLDR UK News. That's TLDR UK News, basically intimating that viewers should ignore anyone who questions what Bill Gates does. I've added some on-screen comments in black and white, so let's take a look.
It goes without saying that the coronavirus is a huge global issue, and whenever big worrying events like this one happen, it inevitably leads to mass speculation and ultimately disinformation. We recently did a video on the myths surrounding the coronavirus, and dedicated one to why Brits are burning down 5G masts. But that's far from the only conspiracy theory lurking online. Another theory that's emerged recently questions the role of Bill Gates in this crisis. So in this video, we'll take a look at whether Bill Gates is really lurking in the shadows trying to capitalise from this crisis, as well as discussing what Gates' relationship is with this outbreak.
Before we dive in, I wanted to highlight that we have a few new items on the TLDR store, including a whole bunch of new Check out these items and a bunch of other stuff over in the TLDR store.
First things first, for those who are unaware, who is Bill Gates? Well, Gates is a co-founder of computing giant Microsoft, and is now the second richest person on Earth according to Forbes, with a net worth in excess of $103 billion. And he's now become the target of a number of stories surrounding this crisis, all of which apparently stem from a Reddit Ask Me Anything, where he was asked what changes are going to be necessary to allow businesses to operate in this coronavirus environment. His reply was what kicks all of this off. Eventually, we're going to have some digital certificate to show who has recovered or been tested recently, or when we have a vaccine, who has received it. Some took digital certificates to mean some sort of microchip, allowing Gates to track everyone who's had the vaccine, leading to a thunderstorm of speculation and disinformation claiming that Gates had engineered a virus in order to microchip everyone. A recent Instagram post from Gates became a fountain of allegations, with many saying no to his vaccine, as well as claims that Gates is achieving population reduction through the virus, with people suggesting that Gates may have ulterior motives in his further defense of the World Health Organization. For the avoidance of any doubt, Gates has never proposed a microchip strategy. For the avoidance of any doubt, Gates has never proposed a microchip strategy, nor is it even possible in the way that some theorists suggest.
So the description of the TLDR News introduction video on YouTube says this, and I quote, "TLDR News aims to make news and politics easier to understand. Our videos are designed to make complex topics understandable to help you engage more with news and politics." That statement is certainly partially true. Of course, if you don't mind partial statements that are skewed to reflect an obvious left-leaning bias, it's just like what happens here in the United States with news, the same kind of thing. We should all be repulsed at those who claim that they're reporting news when in reality they are only ideologues. While their own video points out many unsubstantiated conspiracy theories about Gates, they start their own video defense of him with a complete line of misinformation. TLDR News operates as a corporation in Great Britain, but I checked out a few of their writers, and I can tell you this, those guys are young, maybe in their 20s, and obviously they're following in the footsteps of many other news platforms such as MSNBC and CNN and of course the BBC. And these guys, they were in diapers when Bill Gates began his various campaigns to vaccinate everyone he could. So, who is correct here? It might be good if the boys over at TLDR News took some lessons on researching and how generalization and emphatically wrong data, especially when you're trying to defend a billionaire globalist, can really ruin your credibility with viewers and listeners. So is what you just heard from TLDR News actually fact or fiction? So for the benefit of every viewer, and just in case the kids over at TLDR News might be watching, on December 18th, 2019, the MIT News, that's MIT, one of the most prestigious universities in the world, reported on a story appearing in Scientific American. The MIT News states, quote, "MIT engineers have developed a way to store medical information under the skin using a quantum dot dye that is delivered along with a vaccine by a microneedle patch. The dye, which is invisible to the naked eye, can be read later with a specially adapted smartphone." The article says that it was a team of engineers from MIT and Rice University in Houston who have developed a new vaccine delivery system that does not utilize a standard needle and syringe. Again, it includes a permanent, on-patient, decentralized medical record deposited under the skin. When scanned, it indicates that the subject, the person that has received a particular vaccine. I have seen this technology referred to as human implantable quantum dot tattoos. The MIT News report explained that the microneedles are made of a mixture of dissolvable sugar and polymer called PVA, as well as a quantum dot dye and the vaccine. When the patch is applied to the skin, as in the middle drawing here, the microneedles, which are about 1.5 millimeters long, partially dissolve, releasing their payload within 2 minutes. The article concludes, and I'm quoting again, "By selectively loading microparticles into microneedles, the patches deliver a pattern in the skin that is invisible to the naked eye, as depicted in the last drawing here, but can be scanned with a smartphone that has the infrared filter removed. The patch can be customized to imprint different patterns that correspond to the type of vaccine delivered." The researchers showed that their dye can remain for at least 5 years under the skin, where it emits near-infrared light that can be detected by a specially equipped smartphone. While it may not be an injectable chip like an RFID chip per se, it is certainly equivalent and a progression of the same technology achieving the same goal. The MIT article notes, and I'm quoting again, "The research was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The research and development of the vaccine patch that implants a permanent digital certificate in each recipient was commissioned and paid for by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation." Now folks, that seems pretty clear to me that what this news service from the UK was saying is completely wrong. They just didn't have all the facts. I suggest the producers of TLDR News that they do a little more research before they defend Bill Gates, or maybe they just stop producing fake news, because that's exactly what it was. It was fake news. Worse is the fact that they're trying to correct disinformation, as they claim, but they're really spreading disinformation in the process. If theirs was simply a news report, it'd be one thing. I might chalk it up to simply a lack of having good data. But TLDR News is actually claiming to set the record straight, which they are, in reality, actually doing the opposite of. Many of us who research and speak on prophetic issues have spoken out against the Orwellian nature of the technologies like you've just seen and heard about. And I don't expect the secular news to notice or care about what Bible believers see and understand. But in many instances, Bill Gates gets to do whatever he wants to do. And why is that? Because he's paid for the privilege. I've known for some time that technologies like this exist, and there's a segment concerning these issues in my documentary on technology in the end times called Home Invasion: The Rise of Surveillance Society. This slide actually appears in Home Invasion. Dr. Todd Coleman from the University of California at San Diego has developed tattoos capable of containing and transmitting medical information, including a patient's current condition, brainwaves, heart rate, and other vital signs. These photos are examples of Dr. Coleman's work from his TED Talk back in 2015. Here's another example from the TLDR News clip defending Bill Gates. This is either their liberal bias or its complete ignorance on display. Is it possible to miss the obvious point that they've left out?
When it comes to vaccines, he stresses, short of a miracle treatment, which we can't count on, the only way to return the world to where it was before COVID showed up is a highly effective vaccine that prevents the disease. Unfortunately, the typical development time for a vaccine against a new disease is over 5 years, including making the candidate vaccine, testing it in animals, the 3 phases of safety testing, and the final regulatory approval. So far from being the virus's origin or some shady figure during the crisis, Gates is focusing on how he can put his knowledge and wealth to good use to get a grip on the crisis. Gates' sobering analysis has been useful for many, with the billionaire repeatedly reiterating that developing and distributing a vaccine may be far harder than some people think. Gates even suggests that we should be strategizing for vaccine distribution ahead of time, in order to get the most effective results, saying that when a vaccine is being manufactured, ideally there'll be a global agreement about who should get the vaccine first. But given how many competing interests there are, this is unlikely to happen. The governments that provide the funding, the governments where the trials are run, and the places where the pandemic are worst will all make the case that they should get priority. The long and short of it is that Gates and his foundation have been a positive force for global medicine, and he's already thinking about the next stages of this outbreak. As the Times puts it, unlike billionaires such as Jeff Bezos, who have benefited from Amazon's role in the world's lockdown, or Sir Richard Branson, who has demanded a bailout for his business, Mr. Gates' sole mission is to take on the virus and win. Anything else is a distraction. I don't like to multitask. He doesn't want gratitude, he wants annihilation.
The clip begins by speaking about Gates from a position paper that he wrote. And the unmistakable premise being conveyed by the TLDR News is a defense of Bill Gates as a generous, virtuous philanthropist using his wealth and influence in an attempt to try to save the world. But the clip contains partial truths, leaving the viewer believing that Bill Gates is just spending the wealth that he's accumulated on philanthropy out of the goodness of his heart, but that others, such as Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson, are instead profiting from COVID-19. While it's true that Bezos and Branson are profiting and increasing their wealth from the coronavirus outbreak, Gates stands to make a fortune from it too, and again, it's going to come from vaccines. You know, there's certainly no shortage of off-the-wall conspiracy pages on the internet. Just take a look at some of these headlines. And there are certainly many other sites that make biblical sounding arguments, but they often bring things in that should really concern us because they end up trafficking in reckless and unsubstantiated ideas and conclusions that should infuriate those of us who know our Bibles. Some of these authors and pages have really good information on one topic and then completely crazy information on another, discrediting themselves in the process. You know, I love and respect freedom of speech, but I could spend a lot of time that I simply don't have and refuse to relinquish just trying to correct some of the sensational headlines and stories that we see out there. A lot of this is just plain hype, and I'm trying to speak and do my best to speak directly from what the facts are, not what hype is, or not what will just gain a crowd. While I'm at it, let me say that I refuse to get into a race with some, and there's folks out there who do that. They really want to have the most sensational headline of all, and they traffic in this kind of hype to get noticed, or maybe to sell survival gear. I'm not sure. And I've read and I watch a lot of stuff, and they're making claims that are so far out you would think that nobody with any capacity with reason would ever believe the ideas. Just by thumbing through the comments section, you can see how off the wall some of the people are. And it's really concerning when you think about it. That's the state of the way we think about things when we see it on the internet. That bothers me, and it ought to bother me. Just the content of the comments section is enough. Well, back to the analysis of TLDR News. In fact, the Gates Foundation stands to profit beyond their wildest dreams if indeed Bill Gates is able to manipulate world leaders into just part of his plan for COVID-19 vaccines. And when I say beyond their wildest dreams, that's really saying something when you're talking about the wealth of Bill Gates. In the next clip, CNBC's Becky Quick interviewed Gates at Davos 2019. This clip tells the story that TLDR News and other defenders of Bill Gates conveniently left out.
We're here today with Bill Gates. A lot to talk about what he's been working on. And Mr. Gates, thank you so much for being with us. I'd like to talk to you about your approach to vaccinations. You wrote something recently, and like you always do, you kind of looked at the problem from a scientific and business perspective on things. You've invested $10 billion in vaccinations over the last 2 decades, and you figured out the return on investment for that. And it kind of stunned me. Can you walk us through the math?
Well, it's pretty impressive that when you take these vaccines, get them to be very inexpensive by making big volume commitments, have that right relationship with the private sector, get the delivery system so they're really getting the coverage out there, you literally save millions of lives. And 20 years ago when we created these new multilateral organizations, Gavi for the vaccines, Global Fund for HIV, TB and malaria, we didn't know they'd be successful. They've gone through lots of challenges about making sure the money gets there, making sure the efficiency is right. But as we look at upcoming replenishments for those, and we've got so much distraction politically that the international needs like this could get eclipsed if we're not careful, you know, we see a phenomenal track record. It's been $100 billion overall that the world's put in. Our foundation is a bit more than $10 billion, but we feel there's been over a 20-to-1 return. So if you just look at the economic benefits, that's a pretty strong number compared to anything else. The human benefit in millions of lives saved. So, you know, we're here with a pretty strong message that although all these other issues are very important, let's not forget about the great success in global health and maintaining that commitment.
I think the numbers that you ran through were if you had put that money into an S&P 500 and reinvested the dividends, you'd come up with something like $17 billion, but you think it's $200 billion.
Here, yeah, you know, helping young children live, get the right nutrition, contribute to their countries, that has a payback that goes beyond any typical financial return.
What we learned from the CNBC interview with Gates was that he personally wrote about his 20-fold return. He wanted the world, particularly the elite around him, to know how well his investments went in vaccines and how well they paid off. You know, most every believer knows this passage. For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the truth and have pierced themselves through with many sorrows. 1 Timothy 6:10. You notice it doesn't say that money itself is the root of all evil, but it's how we perceive it. The love of money is the root of all evil. The volume of information coming out and the contradictions and confusion surrounding COVID-19 itself, as well as the treatment options and vaccine efforts, leave most people exasperated as to what is the actual truth, what is partial truth, what might be fantasy, or just plain lies. What are we to believe? Along the way, Bill Gates has been repeating the narrative over and over again, as if it were absolute locked in stone, that before travel and commerce can resume in a post-pandemic world, that digital immunity proof or digital certificates would be needed to verify who has had a vaccine or who has had the virus and who has become immune. Well, considering there has never been a successful vaccine developed for any of the coronaviruses, you know, it could be a long time in coming, if ever. And our country, indeed the whole world, is being told that we simply must wait for it. I'm certainly grateful that President Trump is standing on the idea that we must open up with or without a vaccine, that the economy must be opened again. Bill Gates has remained resolute about mankind's options, and that's certainly no wonder since he not only has a hand and a lot of money riding on several vaccines being developed, but he has funded the research and development for a futuristic delivery system for vaccines complete with a verifying ID marker. ID 2020 comes to mind right here, and I'm going to talk about that in one of the future episodes of this series. Gates is not only a voice coming from the medical and political world repeating over and over the call for vaccines, he's not the only one doing it. Dr. Fauci, Dr. Birx, Dr. Redfield of the CDC, and many others are doing the same thing. But without investigating any of the medical questions and issues associated with vaccines in general, we know that President Trump has been counseled by those who are repeating the drumbeat that vaccines will be our savior. Mr. Trump is certainly no globalist, that's for sure. In 2016, he ran openly against globalism. But his statements to Fox's Maria Bartiromo on May 13th are concerning.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a vaccine by the end of the year. We're doing very well with the vaccine. And I will tell you something, I just literally left a meeting. We're mobilizing our military and other forces, but we're mobilizing our military on the basis that we do have a vaccine. You know, it's a massive job to give this vaccine. Our military is now being mobilized. So at the end of the year, we're going to be able to give it to a lot of people very, very rapidly.
And you're just doing something with syringes as well, so that you can have it plentiful.
That's right.
You have enough vaccine.
We will have the tremendous force, because assuming we get it, then you have to distribute it.
Right.
And unless you're mobilized and ready, you're not going to be able to do it for a long time. So we're starting now. We're of the assumption that by the end of the year, we're going to have a vaccine, and then we have to be able to give it, to use it on most of our population.
Yeah.
Now we'll focus on elderly. We're going to focus on nursing home and you know, senior citizen centers, because that's really, if you look at it, that is a very vulnerable group. It's a terrible thing.
Despite the very vocal resistance by many who understand the ominous nature of what it means, the plan to vaccinate the whole world is being lifted up as the only solution, and any of us who are skeptics are being drowned out. We are told again and again that this is a public health and safety issue, but this is about money. For some, it's about power and control, and for others, it's about money. If you thought there was huge money involved in drugs to treat COVID-19 and the controversy over hydroxychloroquine, well, imagine the perspective of vaccinating every person on the planet. So here are some questions that Bill Gates does not want anyone to ask. What are the results of the trials? At least 2 vaccines being worked on bypassed animal testing and the FDA gave them clearance. Are there any hidden components? What else is in the vaccine besides pure vaccine, and is it good? Does it contain digital markers? Is it an RFID chip or equivalent? Will people be told about that if it is? Will it be mandatory? Will we have to take it? And what if we refuse to take it? Even if an effective vaccine is developed that is completely 100% safe and has no side effects at all, such a vaccine, given with the new MIT Rice University delivery patch quantum dot system that leaves a digital information marker under the recipient's skin, is undoubtedly the best promotion ever for the unsuspecting to receive another mark later. There is no denying that a person's motivation is often hard to determine and even harder to substantiate. But there are circumstances that have fueled wild speculations and pulp fiction type conspiracy theories about Bill Gates that cannot be dismissed without some examination. There is understandably reason that some of us find some of the facts so simply hard to ignore. But when anyone, such as myself, delves into some of the events and the timing and the massive donations and the statements being made, even the most reserved researchers and reporters are classified as conspiracy loons or being insane by the legion of Bill Gates defenders that are out there. Besides being ridiculed with generalities and character assassination, the condescending Gates proponents seem to think that no one should ever question anything that Bill Gates has said or done. Plus, if you're a Christian and not willing to just toe the established acceptable line, the ridicule can be especially harsh. Well, that's okay. I'd rather be right and stand with truth any day. Just as the Apostle Paul begins to unfold God's word about the catching away or rapture of the church, he assures his church about the great hope that we have as Christians. Paul writes, "But I would not have you to be ignorant, brethren, concerning them which are asleep, that ye sorrow not, even as others, which have no hope." We have great hope as Christians, but how does God respond to the evil plans of men? Psalm 2 says, "Why do the heathen rage and people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, Let us break the bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall have them in derision." Psalm 37 says this, "The wicked plotteth against the just, and gnasheth upon him with his teeth. The Lord shall laugh at him, for he seeth that his day is coming." The day is coming when evil will be judged. Those who want to control and rule the world and deny God, the day is coming. I want to leave you with a truth that cannot be overstated, my friends. Bill Gates is not in control. God is in complete control. Philippians chapter 2 tells us that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow, of things in heaven and things in earth and things under the earth, and that every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. This includes Bill Gates and the globalist and you and me. Well, that's it for part 2, and I'll see you again for part 3 of Globalism in the Midst of Pandemic. And in the meantime, if you're watching on YouTube, remember to hit the subscribe button and go over to ericbarger.com and make sure you get our email update newsletter. God bless you, thank you so much, and I'll see you here with the next update.
Thanks for joining us for Take a Stand TV with Eric Barger. We welcome your comments and questions. Please visit us at ericbarger.com. Be sure to tell a friend, and please join us again for more Take a Stand TV with Eric Barger.